Good morning, y'all. My name is Harold, and I'm an alcoholic. And it's by the grace of God and the fellowship I found here in Alcoholics Anonymous hadn't been necessary for me to have a drink of alcohol since February 1970. I take no credit for that. I had the extraordinary good fortune to walk into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I sat down. And I took advantage of everything that was being given away. My home group is the Monday Night Back to Basics group in Annapolis, Maryland, which everyone knows is the best group in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here. I have had just an extraordinary time here this past weekend. It is absolutely fabulous. There's a chapter in our book called Family Afterwards, and I'm looking at it. Just fantastic. I have a Native American friend of mine, Don Coy, and he's a Mohican, and he has a word when he talks about AA. He says, Netashnaka. It means the connectedness. The connectedness. You feel that when we come to Alcoholics Anonymous. Netashnaka, strong, strong. Netashnaka. I have to thank a lot of people, and I want to start with my good friend Bob and his wife Faye. Picked me up at the airport, and he's been tracking me ever since. Whenever somebody knocks on the door, I know there's Bob. God bless him. He's been great the whole time. And my good friend Al and his wife have been wonderful for asking me to be here. And the whole committee that put this on, I've been to a lot of these things, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work. And how about our red shirts? They've been just all over the place. When I was walking the beat, I'd have watched out for them. Yeah. And I was so pleased to hear the memorial you did for Don this morning. It was absolutely outstanding. And while I didn't know Don, he's with us. I remember reading when I was in college the German philosopher. And he said that everything that is not true. Well, Don isn't here, but it isn't true he's not with us. And if memories are the keeper of all things, Don will always be here. So God bless him and you. I have a really difficult time sometimes when I come to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I feel like I'm talking to my friends at home or family, and I have to step back and say, wait a minute, these people don't really know me. And that's not really true. Everybody kept asking me about my talk, and I told them, my sponsor used to say, you're talking to a room full of drunks. He said that I know what I'm going to say, you guys don't. And so I never really know exactly what I'm going to say when I get up here. I had the extraordinary pleasure of serving as a trustee on the board of trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've traveled around the world. I've been all over the world and seen Alcoholics Anonymous at work in many, many places. While I was on the board in New York, I'm an old history teacher. I taught history in high school while I was doing a graduate degree. And I got a chance to read a lot of Bill Wilson's writings, a lot of his writings that aren't even published. And it was extraordinary just to get Bill's insight. God gave Bill a special gift. You know, they say Bill was a stockbroker. Well, Bill wasn't a stockbroker. He was a stock speculator. Bill used to sell fast-talking to slow-thinking people is what Bill Wilson did. But God gave Bill an insight, an extraordinary insight, that he could look down the road and see what was coming. And he knew that alcoholics were very strange people. And he knew that he had to put together some kind of process that they would all accept. And he gave us 3 legacies. And they've been endowed with that. And while I was here today, I see those legacies at work. I was so pleased to see so many Al-Anons here. It's wonderful. I love Al-Anon. We get a lot of transfers from them. Sue was talking about a person I met many years ago. Her name was Brazos O'Neill. And she described her perfectly. We were at a conference in Moorhead College in Minneapolis. And Brazos told a story about this time she had gone to a conference of professionals, helping professionals. And this doctor got up and talked about how he had treated an alcoholic for a whole year, and the alcoholic hadn't drunk for a whole year. And at the end of the year, his wife gave him a bottle of wine. Well, after the meeting, Brazos, and those of you who know it, he marched right up to this guy, and he said, "Did you ever talk to the wife of the alcoholic?" And the doctor said, "No." "Did you ever talk to the family of the alcoholic?" And the doctor said, "No." "Well," she said, "you ought to quit telling that story. You sound like a damn fool." Anybody know our Brazos? I had the extraordinary good fortune of knowing Lois Wilson quite well. And Lois was an extraordinary person. I know she was very upset when Bill wouldn't let her write the chapter to the wives. So she got even, she wrote her own book. She was a beautiful lady. I'll talk a little bit more about her later on. But Bill used to say, nobody invented Alcoholics Anonymous. He said Alcoholics Anonymous is like a giant tapestry. And if you ever look at a tapestry, on one side of it you see a beautiful picture. But if you look behind it, you see 1,000 threads going in 1,000 different ways, different directions. If you pull a thread over here, the picture will change over here. You pull a picture over here, the picture will change over here. And all those thousands of threads are the members of Alcoholics Anonymous moving along. He said that we're like a mosaic in progress. And I think that that's what makes Alcoholics Anonymous so extraordinary. You can't explain to people what it really is. It's the connectedness, the Natasha card that we have here. One alcoholic talking to another alcoholic that binds us together like this mystical cord of grace that binds us together. And that's what we have here. And it's very difficult to try to explain that to somebody who's never walked into the rooms. Bill wanted to give us some simple ideas. It's amazing because we always think of Alcoholics Anonymous being started in Akron when Bill and Bob met together in Akron for the first time. But fact of the matter, and this is my own opinion, so I don't want nobody throwing any chairs up here. Alcoholics Anonymous started in Bill Wilson's kitchen when Ebby came to see Bill for the first time. Because in the first instance, in any kind of recorded way, the problem and the solution finally came together. Roland Hazard had been over in Europe and talked to Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung knew what the problem was, but he had no idea he knew what the solution was, but had no idea what the problem was. We're over in New York. Bill had gone to see Dr. Silkworth. Dr. Silkworth knew what the problem was, but he had no idea what the solution was. The Oxford groups didn't know that there was a problem or that they had the solution. It wasn't until Bill and Ebby came together that the problem and the solution finally came together. Not only that, Ebby brought Bill a simple program of action. A simple program of action. And from that simple beginning, we find ourselves here this morning. Still moving on that mosaic that's still in progress. And that's Alcoholics Anonymous. When I came to AA, I had no idea what Alcoholics Anonymous was. I was like a lot of people. I grew up on the east side of New York. I grew up in a section of New York called Spanish Harlem. Now, you grow up in Spanish Harlem, you grow up very quickly, or you might not grow up at all. By my old neighborhood, by today's standards, they'd probably consider me an entrepreneur. Yeah. In those days, I was a hustler. I used to find stuff before it officially got lost. Yeah. If it was small enough, I just stole it. If it was too big to carry, I lay down next to it and claimed it. Yes, sir. And in my old neighborhood, the philosophy was very simple. What's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable. And you come up out of that kind of environment, you understand a day at a time. I knew that concept long before I ever came in here. And I think that looking back in hindsight, I realized that the things that were happening in my neighborhood, everybody drank. My father was an alcoholic. My father was a beautiful man, and I loved him. He taught me how to read. Taught me to read Dostoevsky and the Rubaiyats of Omar Khayyam and Khalil Gibran when I was a little kid. But then he'd go out and he'd start to drink, and he'd come back and he'd scream and holler, and nobody knew what was wrong with him. And I think that it was looking back in hindsight that I could see now today that he was an alcoholic. And again, in hindsight, the only recorded blizzard in South Carolina occurred in 1906. My grandfather, Reuben, had been drinking corn liquor and walking home from Georgetown back to the farm in Plantersville, sat down on a log, it snowed and blizzard, and he froze to death in the only blizzard ever recorded. So my family, alcoholism goes back in my family way back. Of course, in those days, I had no real idea of what alcoholism was or anything else. I grew up in the street, and that's where we kind of learned everything we knew. When I was a little kid, I was a little scrawny little kid, a little thin. The kids used to tease me. I had to run around the shower to get wet. But I was mean, and I had a fundamental philosophy. If you interfered with me in any way, you had to fight. No question about it. You had to fight. And as small as I was, I would kick and bite and scratch. Mike Tyson didn't have nothing on me. People would see me coming down the street. They'd say, "Leave that kid alone. He'll sneak up behind you with a brick." And I think that happens to alcoholics. They call us loners, but we're not really loners. Alcoholics are really very private people. We keep our own counsel. We know what we want. We know how to do it. We think we know, we have all the answers. That's why a lot of us are in here. we think we know all the answers. And what happens is I built this wall out here, and we all do. And this is like a brick wall, and anytime somebody would try to get to know me a little bit, I put a brother brick in that wall. Somebody tried to find out a little bit about me and learn a little bit about me, I put another brick in that wall. And pretty soon that wall got higher and higher and higher. And one day I looked around and nobody could get to me because of the wall. But I was behind the wall and I couldn't get out. I used to hit that wall. I run into that wall 14 times a day till I figured out I could go around the wall. I love the story. My old sponsor used to tell this story, and I know everybody in here has heard it. It's 100 years old, but I like the way I tell it, so I'm going to tell it. This is how you can tell the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic. There's two doorways at the end of a hallway. And over one door, there's a sign and says peace and happiness. Inside the other door is a guy with a baseball bat. Now, the non-alcoholic comes down the hallway, sees the same two doors, walks through the door. There's the guy with the bat, hits him right in the head. Comes out, goes across the hall, goes into the door where it says peace and happiness, and has peace and happiness for the rest of his life. Well, the alcoholic comes down the hallway, same two doors, walks right through the door. There's the guy with the bat, hits him right in the head. Turns around, comes back down the hallway, turns around, goes right back up the hallway, same two doors, walks right through the door, and there's the guy in there, hits him right in the head. Turns around, comes back down the hallway, turns around. This time he stops, and he thinks to himself, maybe he won't be in there this time. Maybe I can get away with it. So he goes through the door where the guy with the bat was, and he's gone. And the alcoholic goes looking for him. That was me, hitting that wall 14 times every day before I figured out that you could go around it. Yeah, I never will forget, they used to send social workers into my old neighborhood to study us. I remember one of them asked me how far it was to the subway. I told them I didn't know, nobody ever made it. So I knew the streets of New York. I grew up, my father died when I was 8, and I sort of went out and I got money, raised money, and I was always good at it. I could always hustle a few bucks and helped out. My mother didn't have any real education. She did days work. And so I was out in the street a lot, and I did a lot, and I learned a lot. And I think that one of the things that happened to me, and I think it probably what really saved me from early on getting into any real serious trouble, there was a recreation center right on 113th Street near 8th Avenue in Manhattan. And they had a little gym, a little boxing gym. And I was always in a fight. My mother was constantly pulling me off somebody. And so she took me to this gym. I'll never forget him. Joe Waters was the trainer down there. And I started boxing. And I started boxing when I was a little kid, and I boxed right. I took to it like water to a duck. I loved it. And so I started boxing, and I think it kept me out of a lot of trouble because I was training a great deal. So it was coming around to, I guess, the early 60s, the early 50s, and they were drafting people to go into the military. I was still in high school, and I really didn't want to go in the Army. So I did the cool, slick thing. I joined the National Guard. And it seems like the minute I signed the papers, the unit got federalized. Well, I joined the oldest black organization in those days at the time, was the old 369. 369 was the same outfit. They used to be, originally were the 9th Cavalry. The 9th Cavalry were the old Buffalo soldiers. They rode up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War. Well, I met guys that had been drinking since they rode up San Juan Hill with Teddy Roosevelt in the Spanish-American War. And I tell you, this is where, if I had to pinpoint where my alcoholism really took off, that would be it. These were old regular Army guys. The thing about it was, I was drinking. I drank. Everybody drank in Harlem. People didn't trust you if you didn't drink. I started drinking when I was a little kid. I was shining shoes on the corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue, right outside the Hotel Teresa. And the numbers runners would put their number slips in my box, my shoe shine box, and I'd take it up to the bankers. I had more money than most people working. And we drank. I kept a bottle of whiskey in my shoe shine box. Guys would come by and take a nip out of it. So drinking was part of our neighborhood. So when I joined the 369, drinking was part of it. I'll never will forget, well, one night we were somewhere, and they had something called Old Turkey. I never saw it since, but in any event, I poured a whole water glass full of it and drank it down straight. And an old timer looked at me, and he said, "You can't drink like that. That stuff will kill you." And I just kind of laughed at him, because I had been drinking like that since I can remember. And so the 369 got federalized, and we wound up on active duty. And I had gone to a vocational high school, a technical high school, and I had learned electronics and electrical technology. So they sent me down to school. They sent me down to Fort Bliss, Texas. Anybody's been out? State Fort Bliss, Texas is right on. Anybody been down there knows it's right on the border, right across is Juarez. In those days, you could walk across the bridge into Juarez or across the Penny. I remember I once tried to drive a Jeep across the Rio Grande. I didn't think it's still out there. There used to have a drink in Juarez called Oso Negro Gin, Black Bear Gin. I'll never forget it, 44 cents a quart. And Buddy and I were wandering down the streets of Juarez, breaking gin bottles on the lamppost, which the Mexican police take a very dim view of. And we wound up in a Mexican jail. When I was a little kid, we'd go to the movies, and you see these Earl Flynn movies where he'd be the pirate, and they'd be sword fighting and going on, and then they'd catch him and throw him in the dungeons. And you'd see these big blocks of wood and chains on the wall they put people on. I thought it was make-believe till I got in a Mexican jail. The thing about it was I was boxing, and I had a fight coming up. And my CO was a fight fan, and he came and he got me out. And I think that that's really the dilemma of the alcoholic. We get into some of the damnedest things, and somehow we manage to get out. I remember once they asked me to leave jail. Fact. They asked me to leave. Little town, upstate New York, sitting on the curb, sucking out a wine bottle. Police came by, said, get in. Took me to their jail, brand new jail. They put me in a cell, and I laid down, lit a cigarette, fell asleep, and the mattress caught on fire. They took me out of that cell, took me across the hall, put me in another cell, laid down, lit a cigarette, the mattress caught on fire. The guy came in there and said, you have to leave. And they put me out. I really didn't want to go. It never occurred to me how bizarre that was. We never see ourselves the way we really are. Other people can see us clearly. We never see ourselves the way we are. The signposts were all there, all along the way. We could have seen them, but it never seen. We have a disease that tells us we have no disease. Clancy says we have a disease of perceptions. We cannot see what's wrong with us. It's like a veil comes down, and we can't see the things that are harmful. Other people can see it. People around us can see it clearly. And so I just continued on and got into trouble everywhere I went. They sent me up to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Never will forget it. And I was living off the post, and I was going to school we had the Nike systems then, and I was going to school for guided missiles. And they had on the post at the officers club, you could go and get a I think it was a shot of whiskey was about $1.25, and the steak dinner was about $1.50. And I got out, I was out in the club, and I got pretty fired up, and I came back to town. I got halfway back to Huntsville, and I decided to go back out on the post. Well, I did what I considered to be this incredible U-turn. And I thought about this for years afterward. They had to be in the trunk of my car. Because the minute I turned around, there they were, 2 6'6" Alabama state troopers. I've been in law enforcement most of my life. It is not a good idea to argue with state troopers under the best of circumstances, but for me to argue with them in Alabama is insane. I got to tell you, God takes care of children and drunks. Because they let me go. They let me go. They must have said, get this one out of here. They let me go. And so I got into that kind of trouble everywhere I went. Drinking. That was part of it. Everywhere I drink until I fell down, until the cops came, until a place caught on fire, or something would happen to stop drinking. It's the way it was and the way I was. It never occurred to me there's anything wrong with that. And so when we came back out off, we rotated back off active duty. I stayed in the military. I stayed in 20 years. Came back, but we came back to the South Bronx, where I was living at the time. And I had gone to school. I had a lot of good skills. I'm probably one of the very few people that know how to arm a barometric fuse for a hydrogen warhead. They taught me how to do that. I often wonder what would have happened. I was sitting at that console one night, hit the wrong button, but none of us would be in here. So I came back to the Bronx, and I had a lot of these good skills, but they didn't seem to have a big demand for people that knew how to arm barometric fuses. So I took a test, and I'm a good test taker. I took a test, and I wound up on New York City Police Department. And that was the damnedest thing you ever want to see. The first house I worked out of the academy put me right where I grew up in Central Harlem. I knew everybody in the street, everybody, all the pimps, all the drug dealers, the prostitutes, everybody knew me. They see me coming down the street, they be, hey! I never will forget one time, I locked a guy up for being drunk one time. I was so drunk when it came time to go to court, they had to carry me inside. And you know, on the job, they take care of you. We take care of each other. And so I was drinking, and people would take care of me. Finally, they just put me in the office. I wound up on the warrant squad, serving warrants on people, but I was in trouble there. And by this time, I had done another really alcoholic thing. I got married. And the reason I got married was because my brother got married. You know, and we marry beautiful people. Alcoholics do marry beautiful people. Al-Anons will tell you that. Alcoholics marry beautiful people. And I married a beautiful person. And they become my greatest enablers. And that's what she did. She was a beautiful lady. And I loved her dearly. And the thing of it is, as I look back over it, I can see that I didn't really want to be married. I wanted to be out on the corner with the guys. And doing the things that they were doing, running up and down. And I wanted to be responsible, but I had no sense of responsibility. and I would come home from work. I'd come home from work, and my wife would have prepared a really nice meal. And I'd just walk through the house, go in the back and sit down and close the door and start to drink and drink and drink. And it wasn't that I didn't love my family. I loved them dearly. But I couldn't tell my kids I would take them to the ball game or to the circus on Saturday, because I knew by Saturday I'd be drunk. And I wouldn't take them anywhere. So I never promised anything. I just drank and drank. And I started getting trouble on the job. They like you to show up from time to time. And I used to hate to open the mailbox. I'd get these letters in the mailbox with the big red letters on the back of it said, "Pay up or die." And everybody was after me. The bill collectors. My wife needed money for the kids, and it was going on and on and on, and just kept going. And finally one day it occurred to me, and if you can do this, you can take this disease to the moon. One day it occurred to me it was all their fault. It was all their fault. Now, if they stopped asking me for money and these bill collectors would leave me alone, I'd be okay. And so I turned around and I walked out of my house. Wife who loved me, family, just a job, just walked away from it. I get sick every time I think about it. The alcoholic mind. We have a mind of perception, a disease of perception that tells us it's okay. I walked out of the house, left the job, family, everything, and wound up out in the street. And I used to be able to, I had one room somewhere. If you go around the rooms of AA, you see some pictures on the wall where a guy is sitting on the bed and two guys are watching, looking at him. That was me, trying to find peace of mind. And I could go out during the day, and people knew I was on the job, and I could pick up a few bucks here and there. Finally, I couldn't even do that, and I couldn't even afford the room I was living in. And I wound up out in the street. I wound up out in the basement, a dark, dingy basement. I'll never forget it because it had an automatic burner. And every time the burner would fire, I'd hear Handel's Messiah, the whole Hallelujah chorus. I hate the thing today. I used to see lions and tigers running through that basement. Well, I was in that basement one time. I remember coming to, and I looked around. And I looked at myself and I said, "What are you doing here? Why are you in this basement? I come from a good family. I got a relatively good education. What are you doing in this basement?" And I had no real answer for that. And so I did what I always did when I got into a jackpot. I was going to pray. When I was a kid, and I guess everybody, when you're a kid and your family takes you to church, you take you by the hand, you go to church. You don't have anything to say about it. They took us to church. I went to church, and I listened very carefully to what the preacher said. And what I heard the preacher say was God was somebody you could make a deal with. Yeah, you do that for me, and I'll do that for you. And every time I got into a jackpot, that's what I do. Get me out of this. And so when I was in the basement, I prayed, get me out of this. And nothing happened. At least I thought nothing happened. I know today God was right there. God hadn't gone anywhere. God was right there. And so I said that I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and nothing really happened. And I didn't know what to do. One of my favorite books in the other big book, the Bible, is in Ecclesiastics. And the Ecclesiastics write in their book, they say for everything there's a season and a purpose for everything under the heaven. There is a time to be born and a time to die. I believe there's a line somewhere. There is a point beyond which God will not permit us to endure pain. We all come to that point at some time, and when some of us get there, we die. When some of us get there, we find our way into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. But whether we die or whether we come here, God has arranged that we don't have to suffer anymore. One of my favorite writers is a man named Walter Benton. And in one of his writings, he describes what happens to the alcoholic. He says that our days are of time and hours, and as the clock hand turns, a circle closes in upon us, and a black, timeless night sucks us in like quicksand and receives us totally, without a rain check or a parachute or a key to heaven or a last long look. The alcoholic spirals down and down and down and down. And then for some inexplicable reason, God reaches in and plucks some of us out and sets us into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've long since stopped trying to understand why some of us are here and some of us are not. I believe God has a plan. There's a plan that we are all part of. I understand that today. I didn't at the time. And I kept getting into trouble. And then one day, one morning, I'll never forget, we had, some of my colleagues and I had managed to promote a bottle of wine. And I get a phone call. And it's from the hospital. I had a job driving dump trucks back and forth to the old landfill out in Staten Island. It was the same landfill they used after 9/11. In those days, it was brand new. And I had a job running dumps back and forth there. And I had come back, come back and parked the truck, and was going out somewhere, and I forgot something. I went back, got the truck, and went back out and almost crashed the truck. And the cops came, and they got the truck back up on the road, and they suggested that I go get an x-ray. And I did. I went down to the hospital and had an x-ray. Forgot about it. Next morning, I had invested in this bottle of wine, and I get a phone call that says, you have to come down to the hospital right away. Well, I tried to explain to this lady, I just put my money in this bottle of wine, and I really wasn't going nowhere. But she said, if you don't come back, we're going to send somebody out to get you. Well, the last thing I needed was people looking for me. So I go back down to the hospital. Turns out I had tuberculosis. And I had it so severely, they wouldn't let me go back home. They shipped me in an ambulance and shipped me out to an isolation ward, way out on the tip end of Staten Island, a place called Seaview Hospital. And I realized today that was probably the best thing that ever happened to me. And it may seem strange saying getting a serious disease like tuberculosis was a good thing, but for me it was. Ever since I was a little kid, from the time I got into trouble, time I can remember I was in trouble. And while I was in the hospital, I had all the time to remember, look back over my life, and I saw every single time that I got in any trouble. Anytime I went to jail or got into a fight or lost a job, or anytime something bad happened to me, I had been drinking or I was drunk. And I think it was in that hospital that the cement block up here lifted. And a message went through, there's something wrong with you. And it had to do with alcohol. Well, I got to tell you, nobody came running down the hallway with a donut and a cup of coffee. What happened was the supervising nurse on my ward was one of you sneaky people. And she had been watching my shenanigans all the time, because I was running games in the hospital just like I did out in the street. And I'll never forget it. I was sitting on the side of the bed, very quiet and very subdued, which is not my normal state. And she came by and she saw me and she asked me what was the matter. And I think for the first instance of grace coming into my life, I told her. I was afraid. I was afraid to go back out in the street. While I was in the hospital, I was in a protected environment. I had everything I needed. And I knew the moment I stepped outside those doors, I'd be right back in that rat race again. I'd be just like Alice in Wonderland, running twice as fast to stay exactly where I was. And I told her I was afraid. I didn't want to go. And then she asked me the question I think we all get asked in one form or another. She asked me if I really wanted help. And I said, yes, I do. I really want help. And so when I came out of the hospital, she arranged for me to get to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. The John Birch Society started on the South Shore of Staten Island. There are people that live on the South Shore of Staten Island who think the John Birch Society are liberals. Well, I went to my first meeting on the South Shore of Staten Island. And the minute I walked into the room, I knew there was something wrong. First thing, there were no black people in there. The other thing, this was in February, and there were people in there had on white shoes in the winter. I never heard of that. They don't wear white shoes in the summertime in Spanish Harlem. I said, these are some very strange people. And I was on my way out the door. A guy ran up to me with this book, this blue book, and he showed it to me. And he said that everything that you ever need in life is in this book. Well, my scheming mind went right to work. When I left that hospital, everything I owned, I carried out of there in a shopping bag, and that had a hole in it. I said, if everything I need is in this book, I'll read this book, figure out how to get a loan out these people. That was my motivation. I read that book from cover to cover, and I came back a week later, and I went up to him. His name was Ellie Andrew. God bless him. He died when I was 15 years sober. I loved him. I called him my walking stick. I walked up to Ellie and I said, I can't get a loan out of this book. He said, yes, you can. Yes, you can. He was right. I must have read that book 100 times by now. And I can still read it and find answers to questions that I need. And so Ellie said that, what he told me, he said, I'm going to be your sponsor because you don't have brains enough to get one. And I said, okay. And so we started to walk on. He explained the thing I loved about Ellie was anytime that we would start to do something, anytime it was a step or a concept or a principle or whatever it was, he would always explain it to me. This is what the intent of it is. This is what the reason behind it is. This is what the results will be. And we started walking through this 12-step process. And I was going to give him the 25-cent version of my life story. And he held up, he said, stop me cold. And he said, we're not interested in who you are. We're going to find out who you are not. And we're going to get rid of all of that, and who you are will show up. And we started to walk through this process. And he said, what we're going to do is connect the dots, just like a puzzle. We're going to connect the dots. We're going to go from point A to point B, point C, and when we're finished, it's going to be a picture. And that picture is you. And he began to explain to me what we were going to do. We're going to build an arch. We're going to build an arch. And when that arch is completed, you're going to be able to step through it into what he called a sunlight of the Spirit. He said that the foundation of that arch is step one because it describes the problem. It tells you what's wrong with you. Why are you here? Your problems of alcohol and your life's unmanageable. That's the problem. He said the cornerstone in that arch is the second step because it tells you the solution. Come to believe that there's a power greater than yourself that can restore you to sanity. That's the answer. That's the answer. I'll never will forget the first time I was going through looking at the steps, and Ellie explained to me, he said in the beginning, we had a 6-step program. And Bill said there were too many loopholes in that, too many ways that drunks could wiggle out. So he stretched them out to 12. And he got to step 2. We had people that had been sober. In the beginning of our book, it says we are 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Well, it really wasn't 100. Bill took a little license from every now and then. It was 40, 50 maybe, but he went to them. And he asked them what they had done. And they said, well, we did these steps, and now we know. There is a power greater than ourselves that can restore us to sanity because it happened to us. And I walk and I pick up our book, and I see somebody's already done this. I know there's hope for me. So he said, we know what the problem is. We have no power. We know what the solution is. Find the power. All we need is a direction to go. He wrote step 3. Make a decision. Turn your will and your life over to the care of God as you understood him. And move on with the rest of the process. And so we started to walk through these incredible principles, applying them day at a time. And all the time, I'm not realizing that we're sitting there. I'm sitting in these meetings, and it's like a precipitation sprinkling down, and this is coming over me. It happens to us, and we don't really realize that this change is happening. I'm beginning to listen. I think the greatest gift we get in AA over and above sobriety is the ability to listen carefully. I began to listen and hear what they were saying. We got to a point where he said that you have to change. That's what this is all about. You have to change. Change isn't easy. Change is not easy at all. We have to look at the truth of ourselves. I remember Ellie would always tell stories. He told this story about this little Jewish boy. Little Jewish boy came home from the synagogue school, and he went up to his father and he said, you should have heard the story the rabbi told us today. So, you know, the Jews were trying to get out of Egypt, and the Egyptians were chasing them. Well, they came to the Red Sea, and the Jews had an engineer with them, and they built a bridge and went over the Red Sea with the Egyptians right behind them. And when they got on the other side, the Jews had a demolition engineer with them and blew up the bridge with the Egyptians on it. And the father looked down and said, the rabbi told you that? And the kid said, no. But if I told you the story the rabbi told me, you'd think I was nuts. We have to see the truth of ourselves. That's what he said. We have to look at the truth the way it really is. When I was a beat cop in New York, I knew a guy. His name was Haj Malik El-Shabazz. Many people knew him as Malcolm X. And I talked to Malcolm many times. And one of the things Malcolm said to me, I never forgot. He said, truth without love is cruel. That confrontation without a solution is worthless. And I walk in here, and I see that Bill Wilson has said we have to look at the truth of ourselves. We look at the truth of ourselves. And here's what happens. He writes in our books that the great reality, that's what he calls God, the great reality, the real power, is deep down within each and every one of us. Deep down within each and every one of us. And then he goes on to tell us how to find it. Rid yourself of all bias, think honestly, and look inside yourself, and the power will emerge. And so I began to walk through these simple ideas and began to understand. I see the power. And we talked about the prayer and how important and valuable prayer is. And he said that in the back of our book, in the 12 and 12, he writes that the real benefit of prayer is that we are no longer lonely or purposeless. And despite all the evidence to the contrary, we come to understand that the really important things in life are truth and justice and love. And so he began to show me how the truth would help us. There's no saying out in the street, the truth will set you free. Well, first it will piss you off. Nobody really wants to look at the truth, particularly the truth of themselves. But here we do it with love and compassion and understanding. So I began to look at the truth of myself, and there was an answer. I began to see the answer. And I could see what he meant when he said, God is in his heaven and all's right with the world. Because I saw the truth as it really was. There's not a lot of people in the world that can say who they are. I'm an alcoholic. I know exactly what that means. It tells me what I can do. It tells me what I can't do. I didn't know that when I came here. I understand that there is a power that can help me. And that power is deep down within me. And I needed to find it. And as I started to walk through this process, the power began to emerge, strong and powerful. And I began to see what he understood. We came to this point where he says that we are entirely ready to have these defects of character removed. Ask God to remove these defects of character. Well, I wasn't too sure about that. My defects of character, some of them might come in handy. Besides, the statute of limitation hadn't run out on some of my stuff. I didn't want to get too good too fast. But then he would tell the story. He would say that a doctor can't heal anybody. He sets up the conditions. He can diagnose the illness. He can prescribe the medication. He sets the conditions so a change can take place. God will heal a patient. A farmer can't grow anything. He sets up the conditions. He plants the seeds. He waters the soil. He sets the conditions so a change can take place. God will make the plants grow. We can't change anything. We set the conditions. And God will do it for us. And then all we have to do is ask. Humbly ask. And so I got to that point where I'm asking God to remove these defects of character. And I never forget the first time I read that prayer in the 7th step and asked God to remove all these defects of character that stand in the way of my usefulness. I said that prayer and I went back and I told Lily, nothing happened. I didn't get no wings. I didn't get a halo or nothing. And he made me go back and read it again. And this time, I understood what he was saying. Remove these defects of character so that I can be useful to you and my fellows. And I began to understand the strange kind of dichotomy. I asked to have these defects removed on the one hand so that I can be useful and grow spiritually on the other. I never would have known that or even understood it if I hadn't walked in here. And so we continued on through this process, and I began to go and understand. In the meantime, my wife had gotten cancer and died, and both my kids were in foster care. And I have to tell you, I was really upset about that, and I went to Ellie one day, and I said, I'm going to get the kids back. And Ellie said something, be very careful what you pray for. He said, if God really wants to punish you, he will answer your prayers. When I first came into AA, I had taken some courses, and I was a general contractor. And I was doing a lot of retrofits, ADA retrofits for HUD. And I was bidding out federal contracts. And under normal rules, if you have a federal contract, you have to bid it out. But if it's under a certain dollar amount, you can give it to the responsible contractor. So I had a small contract, and a guy came to me, and he said, could he ask me for the contract? And I gave him the contract. Then he came back to me and said he needed money, didn't have any money to buy materials. His wife was sick, and his business wasn't good. Gave me a long story. I gave him the money, fronted him the money to buy materials. And the guy stiffed me. The guy took off with my money. I went to his house. I couldn't find him. I went to his office, and I couldn't find him. Couldn't find him anywhere. I have some friends of mine over in Brooklyn and New York. They specialize in kneecapping. And I was going to get a couple of these guys to speak to him seriously. At the very least, I was going to back one of my cement trucks up to his house and fill up his living room. And I made the mistake of telling my sponsor what I was going to do. And he said, no, you have to pray for him. Well, I thought that was the dumbest thing I ever heard. You do not pray for people who steal your money where I come from. But I had been with this guy now for about a year, and everything he told me turned out to be true. And I had what Bill called the faith the size of a mustard seed. So I said, okay, I'm going to pray for this guy. You just heard this prayer. Listen, God, I'm going to pray for this SOB. I hope he have a heart attack. Nothing serious, you understand, only he shouldn't recover. Well, I tell you, I prayed that prayer, I guess maybe a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month. And all of a sudden, one day, like somebody pulled a string out of an orange, that knot in my gut was gone, absolutely gone. And I'll never forget it because about a year later, I was having lunch with another contractor. And he said, you know that guy that stiffed you for that contract last year? I said, yeah. I said, he said to me, you know he had a heart attack and died? I said, I was praying for that guy. He looked me right in the eye and said, please don't never pray for me. I learned some valuable lessons, some valuable lessons from that. When you pray, there's always an answer, always an answer. And when you pray, God will make a way. All we have to do is believe. And so I continued on through this process. And my wife had gotten cancer and passed away. My boys were in foster care. And so I got my kids back, And I have to tell you, I spent the next 10 years raising them, and they're both beautiful men, both of them police officers, both of them in AA. My youngest son works up on the Hill. He gets a lot of flack. He's been going through a lot of stuff up in Washington, D.C. the last month or so. My other son runs a state police barracks in Pennsylvania. And those are the kinds of things that happen as I grow on. I never will forget, as we were walking through this process, my mother got sick, and she had diabetes, and so severely they had to amputate her leg. And I had to talk to the doctor, but then I went to tell my mother that they were going to amputate her leg. And I held her hand all the way right into the operating room, held her hand, told her that I loved her. And she went through the operation, came out. She didn't last too long, and when she passed, the funeral home was so full, people were wondering, who are all these people? They were people from the fellowship. They filled the place. They helped put the wind beneath my wings and held me up. And I was able to go through it with the love and understanding of the people in these rooms. And so life kept going on. I learned that a long time ago. Life doesn't stop because we come and get sober. Life keeps coming at you, sometimes hard and fast. Donna can tell you that. Keeps coming at you, hard and fast sometimes. But if you have the faith here, the size of a mustard seed, you can get through any of it. And we love it. And so one day, we were at my group, and we were having our business meeting. And I went out to the bathroom. And when I came back, I was the GSR. I didn't know what a GSR was. Ellie said, not to worry. And he gave me the service manual. I'll tell you, anytime you get sleepy and you can't sleep, get a service manual and read it. But I started walking through this process. And going up through the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous. I became the first district committee member in Staten Island, first one ever. And then one day, my service sponsor was a woman named Jackie Solomon, who was actually Bill Wilson's secretary for a short period of time. And she said, there's a vacancy up in New York on the World Services Corporate Board, put in your resume. Well, I really didn't want to, but you don't argue with Jackie. So I put my resume, and next thing you know, I'm a director on the World Services Corporate Board of Alcoholics Anonymous, me. In case anybody doesn't know, AAWS is where all your money goes. Every time you put money in the basket, it goes up to AA World Services. They do all the publishing, translating, all the literature that we have is done by the World Services corporate office. Actually, I was chairman of the board for a while. Me, drunk like me, chairman of the board, handling all your money. And then 4 years later, I was elected as a trustee on the board of trustees of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had the extraordinary privilege of traveling around the world and seeing Alcoholics Anonymous at work in many, many places. All over the world. I remember once I was up in Glasgow, Scotland. I was going to Blackpool for England's 50th anniversary, and we stopped off in Glasgow. And my host was, I'll never forget him, Ray Magruder. He had 2 Rolls Royces and owned the bar. And he calls me up and he says, would you like to go on a 12-step call with me? And I said, yeah, sure I would. So he comes by and picks me up in his Rolls Royce. And we go out to St. Andrews Golf Course. I don't know if anybody's ever seen St. Andrews out in, it is absolutely gorgeous. Huge mansions all around this place. And we drive up to this mansion, go inside, and here's this guy crawling around on his hands and knees, drunk as a skunk. It turns out he was a member of Parliament. I tell you, he was drunk as a... Bob, they puke just like we do. We gathered this guy up and we took him with us. I had him a whole week. Took him down to Blackpool, England at their 50th anniversary and came back up to Scotland. I don't know if that guy is still sober, but it was probably one of the most extraordinary experiences I've ever had. And I never will forget once we were at a regional forum in Bethesda, Maryland. And it was at the time the Berlin Wall came down, and we were very, very excited because AA was going into all the Eastern Bloc countries, Czechoslovakia and Romania and Latvia. And we were all excited, and a big book was being published in all those Eastern Bloc languages. And finally, the regional trustee that was running the forum said, did anybody have any questions? And the guy in the back stood up. And he said, how many of our books have been translated into the African language of Swahili? There weren't any. But to just give you a sense of the commitment and the commitment of the people in New York, of our staff members and coordinators, we had been corresponding with a priest in Kenya who had translated the big book into Swahili. He sent us the translation and we edited it. And not to make a long story longer, within 6 months we had the first volume of Alcoholics Anonymous in Swahili. And what was really important was the guy that asked the question was the Bongo. He was from Nigeria. He was a student. And he was having his 10th anniversary in Bethesda, and he asked me to speak at his anniversary. And I was able to take the first copy of the big book in Swahili and give it to him. Same guy that asked the question. And so it never ceases to amaze me how Alcoholics Anonymous works. And when Don talked about the Natasha of Alcoholics Anonymous, he's really saying that we have what Bill always envisioned, one alcoholic talking to another. It works then and it works now. How much time have I? I'm running on. Give me a high sign back there, man. Okay. We see that as we go along in our program and we begin to work, and I began to see this happening in my life, I began to go out and understand that Alcoholics Anonymous, the legacies that he's given us, acts out long before we leave here. As we go out into the world, we see how our lives begin to change and be affected by other people. I started to manage public housing, and I did that. I ran public housing when I came out of the hospital. I went back to school, and I got a couple of degrees. And I started to build housing that people could afford. As a matter of fact, I was going to talk to Sue about it because we were up in Montana. We was in Montana I was in Red Lodge a few times and built houses in Loris, in the Crow Reservation, and up in the Glacier Park in the Blackfoot Reservation. and And I built houses all around the country, and I started to manage public housing and build housing that people could afford. And everywhere I went, I started a little boxing team. And I get kids off the street, and we start boxing. I have one here in Annapolis now, where we have kids boxing and working their lives out and staying out of trouble. And so I think that what Alcoholics Anonymous has shown me and what's given me is a way of life. It's not about not drinking. I learned that a long time ago. I learned that Alcoholics Anonymous is the way we live today. We can make a difference in people's lives. And all we have to do is stand up and show ourselves and be willing to do it. I spoke at Bill W.'s anniversary. I never met Bill. In 1970, my sponsor, Ellie, was going to take me up to his anniversary and meet him. And my sponsor fell and broke his hip. And so we never got up to New York to meet Bill. He said, never mind, we'll go next year. Well, next year Bill died. So I never got to meet Bill Wilson. But I got to know Lois Wilson very well. As a matter of fact, I used to do the switchboard, a volunteer down in Manhattan in a group. And she would come up to the office and we'd sit and talk for hours. Once when I first moved up to Westchester County, she let us actually meet in stepping stones. We didn't have a district then, and we met in stepping stones for a while. And in 1980, I was at Bill W.'s anniversary, and it was at the Hilton. And upstairs over the stage, there's a little sitting room. And I went up there, and there was Lois sitting by herself. And we sat down and we talked and chatted, and she told me a lot of different things. And she told me about this time that Bill Wilson met these Arabs in AA. And she said that in Arabic, when they greet you, they say, we salute you and we thank you for your life. And that's what they said to Bill when they met him. And she explained that Bill had brought the message to them. And because of Bill, their lives had been changed and they had been saved. And I believe that that's what happened around the world for all of us. One of my favorite pamphlets is called A Member's Eye View. If anybody hadn't read it, I would really recommend it. It's an alcoholic talking to a group of non-alcoholics and explaining what AA is. And one of the things he says is that nothing that we do here is new. Everything that happens in Alcoholics Anonymous is as old as time itself. The reason the principles of AA work are because they are true principles. They will work anywhere. And toward the end of that pamphlet, the writer takes kind of a biblical turn. And he talks about the time that John the Baptist was in one of Herod's prisons for the last time. And while he was in prison, John heard about his cousin, Jesus. And Jesus was about the land, doing all kinds of miraculous things. And John called two of his followers to him and he said, go and find John and ask John if he is the Messiah. Ask John if he's the one we've been waiting for. Ask Jesus if he's the one we've been waiting for. And two men go out and they find the Lord and they walk with him and for a while. And then one day they asked him, are you the Messiah? Are you the one we've been waiting for? And Jesus didn't answer them directly. What he said was, go back to John and tell John only what you have seen and only what you have heard. Tell John that the blind can see and the deaf can hear and the lame can walk and the poor in spirit have been given the good news. Well, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I can report to you for a fact. I know that the blind can see and the deaf can hear and the lame do walk and the poor in spirit have been given the good news. Alcoholics Anonymous is here. It's here for each and every one of us. God bless you and thank you very much.